So when you get home today, I want you to make a star, as you've seen, because part of our lesson today is on the Star of Bethlehem, and we're going to look at that. First of all, I want you to think about this for just a moment. January 21st, 2010, the Supreme Court issued a ruling allowing corporations to spend without limit in support or opposition of political interest, giving corporations the same right to freedom of expression as individual citizens of the United States. Furthermore, in this ruling, allowing corporations to create nonprofit corporations that are not required to disclose the donor or the amount of contributions, in essence, giving huge influence to anonymous corporations without any accountability. Now, the chances are there are not another 5 people in the United States that agree with that ruling. It doesn't matter what political party that you're in, but there were 5 Supreme Court justices that signed off on that, supported that, and I didn't read the ruling this week, but it's 90 pages long, about 60,000 words to justify why a corporation has the same rights and freedoms to express themselves, even anonymously, as individuals do. Now, that probably is going to affect your life in a more practical way than the 3 presidents that have been presidents since that ruling was passed in 2010. Let me give you an example. For instance, in 1999, insulin cost $21 for a vial of insulin. The cost of that same vial today is $332. Guess who spent the most money on lobbying Congress and influencing political elections in this last election? You guessed it. Healthcare, particularly pharmaceutical companies. The same vial in another country, for instance in Canada, for instance in Mexico, is about $6. That's right, it's about $6. Yet, and still, the Supreme Court ruled that corporations have the same right, the same access, the same freedom of expression to spend money, to support a political opinion, or to be in opposition of political opinion. And it goes to show you how much power that has in an election. Now, when you stop and you think about that, that's disgusting to us as people, and nobody thinks that's right. The sole purpose, now listen to this, the sole purpose of a corporation is to make profit. You see, a corporation cannot stay in business just because they want to do good things, just because they want to be this benevolent organization that's doing the best they can for humanity, for America, and all of these other things. A corporation has to make profit in order to stay in business. Now, what they do in order to make profit is hopefully they stay within the boundaries of the law in order to make profit. But nowhere do we say that corporations are the same thing as the interest of what we think of as the Constitution describes as the governed, meaning American people. We don't think of them as the same, nor do we think of them as having the same objective, yet and still the Supreme Court said that they could be and should be. Now that's disgusting to us because we do not believe that corporations have the same interest, the same goals, and the same objectives as what an individual would, be they Democrat, Republican, Independent, don't care, or whatever they might be. We just don't think that corporations have the same vested interest that the average American does, because that's the nature of corporations. That's the nature of collective interest when we think about making profit. Now, I've said all of that to say this. When I begin to think about the church, I have to say I think about a corporation, whether intended, whether they wanted that, whether that was sort of calculated in the beginning. I don't know. I just think that way. And I also feel this. COVID will change the church permanently. This huge organizational structure that I call the consumer church will in part emerge in some way, having been effective in a way that is never the same, and I personally believe this is good. All right? I believe that's good. In other words, when COVID is gone, I don't think the church will ever be the same. I don't think it will emerge the same. I think it will be permanently affected as a result of COVID, and I believe that is good. This massive organizational structure known as the church or parachurch interests have overwhelmed the simplicity of a personal relationship with God. It has substituted the message of redemption and divine intimacy with busyness, effectiveness, and influence. The cultural concept of success, that being power, numbers, and the ability to accumulate wealth, has become their objective. People truly believe that such organizations were and are intended to control their relationship as a believer, as followers of Jesus. The consumer church has created systems that generate huge influences and massive resources as evidenced as their intended authority by God. Similarly, defining one's weight as the measure of a fulfilling life. In defining mass as the objective, we eliminate the possibility of authentic fulfillment and have created this colossal, obese consumer organization that we call the church. Redemption that restores intimacy with God comes from an inner longing to know and to please God. The lack of authentic fulfillment is evidenced by a constant, never-ending rotation in church people seeking the next religious buzz. It will emerge a generation that have absolute disdain for organization as a religion, even with rock star preachers, incredible organizations, and resources that of a Wall Street hedge fund. It remains wanting, searching for the next trending obsession. It remains powerless to push back on fear or to bring peace to our personal world, or even to experience the joy promised by angels from on high. Why? Because we permitted this organization to take this from us. COVID should give us pause, because COVID will deny this massive organization the mechanism by which they continue to feed this control. It's very difficult for churches that run 3,000 and 4,000 and 5,000 when they look out and they see 100 or 150. Churches that have budgets of $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 a week that now have incomes of $3,000 and $4,000. It's very difficult. What is interesting, though, our access to God has not changed. Our ability to have an intimate and ongoing relationship with God has not changed. If anything, it's gotten better. Our ability to seek Him, to know Him, to look for and to listen to Him has gotten better. All of a sudden, it is not the church that is issuing commands and raising money and compelling us to work. It is God that we now look to give us peace in our daily lives, to give us hope that we will survive, and in the end, to bring joy to our lives. What did Jesus say about the church? Or more precisely, the word is gathering. Oddly enough, Jesus never gave any more structured definition than the word gathering to church. Loose organization of people gathering, two or more, in His name. Any place, any time, and any people can be church. Can be church. In the first century, when the church got together, they worshiped God. They prayed together. They studied together. They encouraged each other. They supported and showed each other affection. They shared meals together and even partied together. Think about that. That's what they did. Anytime, any place, anywhere, any people. Two or more gathered in his name. As I look for a story in Scripture, I have to go to the wise men. And I have to say, these were, as I often say, the most unlikely candidates for announcing the Messiah I can imagine. Wise men saw a star as a sign from God that the Messiah had been born. Now, I really think that God would have loved to have gone to the temple in Jerusalem and announced that his Messiah was here and that he was in Bethlehem and that they should celebrate. They should break out in praise. They should be happy. But listen to this. The Messiah they were looking for was not the same Messiah that God was giving. So it was impossible for them to ever see God's Messiah. So he went to wise men from a different country, from a different place, of a different religion, in order to show them a star as evidence of the birth of the Messiah. And when they came, this is what they said: "We have seen his star, and we have come to worship him." Now, they didn't build a church there, even though there's one there now. They didn't create a retreat there, which there may be one there now. They said, "We have come to worship him. We saw his star, and this star guided them eastward, westward." This is what the wise men did. In seeing the star, they owned that they were to respond. They were to respond. Now, remember what I said. I'm sure that God would have loved if the nation of Israel, that Jewish people, could have heard this message. But they couldn't. It's not what they wanted. It's not what they were looking for. But here's these wise men who owned it, who said, "This is the announcement of the King of the Jews, and we must go and worship him." They owned it themselves. They didn't wait on anybody else to give them these instructions. They took a chance on not knowing, because we know that they had to kind of look around when they got there. They didn't know. They took a chance. So think about this for a moment. All of a sudden, we're without this huge organization structure of what we call the consumer church today. And yet God, listen to this, God is willing to speak to us today the same way he did the wise men 2,000 years ago and show us a sign and a direction for our lives if we will own that. Individually, he will do that. And then if we will take a chance on that, yes, it might not work out, because their first attempt didn't, because we know that they were looking for him, searching for him, and eventually went to Herod and said, "We have seen his star, and we've come looking for him." I wrote a version of Scripture here. that I think probably says this. Now, after Jesus was born in Bethlehem of Judea in the day of Herod the king, wise men from the east came to Jerusalem, saying, "Where is he that is born the King of the Jews? We have seen his star in the east, and we have come to worship him." When Herod heard this, he was upset, and all Jerusalem with him. He called a really big meeting with all the leaders of the established church, preachers and pastors, publishers, university presidents, and inquired from them, "Where is the Christ to be born?" Now, these were the experts that were supposed to know this, and they said, "Well, yes, it does say it's in Bethlehem." And so what did they do? Nothing. Except Herod. He issued a decree to kill all the young men under the age of 3. That's how the established group responded. Back to the wise men, they took a chance, not knowing how this was going to turn out, and they interrupted their lives. By my calculation, now, in the manger, we see the wise men there. But I can tell you, the wise men did not show up that night. It probably took them about a year. In fact, the scripture says they went to the residence where Jesus was. I'm thinking it took them about a year. They interrupted their lives. They took a year off from their life. Looks like we're going to do that too with COVID. Took a year off from their life to go and look for Jesus so they could worship him. They stayed with it. They searched. They continued. Listen to this. And they made sacrifice. They took from their own resources. Gold, frankincense, and myrrh that we know of. And as a part of their worship of him, they gave it to Jesus. Now, we have not been taught this way, and I know that. We have been taught that the church will instruct you, they'll commission you, they'll give you an assignment, they call people, they finance people. We've been taught that way. But in reality, this is the responsibility of the believer. It forces me, listen to this, it forces me individually to focus on God. See? Not the church. It forces me to focus on God. It forces me to talk to him. It forces me to listen to him. It forces me to seek resources from him. All of this is a part of my intimacy with God. That was never the responsibility of this superstructure. Never. So when COVID emerges, much of that will not survive this, and that is good. Because it will be placed in and on us as believers. Think about this for a moment. All of a sudden, you need to be thinking, with you and your family, should we have Sunday school in our house as a family? You got better resources today than in the history of humanity. I promise you, you do. You should be thinking that way. We should have a Sunday school class here in our home with our family. We should be having a prayer meeting here in our home with our family. Now, I know they did those things collectively in the beginning, but not at the exclusion of what I am to do with people that I love in my family. Listen to this. I should be thinking how it is that God is going to put a star in my life to show me where and how and who I am to invest in. You cannot believe the places to invest. You have to stop saying this is the church's job and start owning the responsibility within yourself. Now remember this. When God showed the wise men the star, he chose people who could, who were gifted, who were able, and gave them the resources to do that which he had called him to do. He'll make the same deal with you. You act. And I promise you, he'll never leave you out there with something you're not capable of or the resources to do that. When we emerge from this pandemic, the church will be different. But I want us to be empowered to have an intimate, personal, ongoing relationship with God as never before. Not looking to some superstar, some huge corporate structure to supply this and to do this in our life, but a simple, personal relationship with God. That's what I want to see emerge from this. That's my hope and that's my prayer. That's my teaching for today. Would you bow your heads?